morning. This is Professor Damon Fordham, and this is the last lecture of the semester. And we're going to use that little thin supplement book that you've gotten along with your main text as a main text with your companion reader. And the last subject will be the rise of the Islamic faith or the Muslim religion, a subject where there's a lot of confusion and controversy about it. Now, the religion of Islam began with a man known as Prophet Muhammad. Prophet Muhammad was born Muhammad ibn Abdullah, which translates into Muhammad the son of Abdullah, in 570 AD in Mecca, Saudi Arabia. He was married 8 times, beginning at the age of 25, and was raised by one of his uncles. He referred to the time that he grew up as the days of ignorance, because the people were very superstitious and worshipped idols, and his uncle, in fact, was an idol salesman, as well as dealing with a lot of fratricide and such, and he was disgusted by these things. So the Muslims believe that at the age of 40, he was visited by the Archangel Gabriel, who was said to have ordered him to reform the people, and he was said to have revealed revelations to him from the Archangel Gabriel, and this was recorded in what is known as the Quran. And this is a copy that I bought when I was at the University of South Carolina and dealing with various religious studies. So the Quran is considerably different in the Bible in that while it has many of the same people mentioned, such as Moses, Noah, and Jesus, and so forth, the Bible is more or less a linear type story, beginning with the creation and Adam and Eve. Then you go into Noah and Abraham and Moses and the Old Testament prophets. Then you get to the birth of Jesus. You lead up to Jesus' crucifixion. Then you deal with the Apostle Paul and his journeys, and it ends with the revelation of St. John Divine, which talks about the Battle of Armageddon, where you have this new heaven and the new earth. Okay, so it's like a linear story with the middle and the beginning and the end. The Quran is considerably different in that it's basically consists of these revelations, and it doesn't tell a straight story. It just basically gives these revelations and meditations here and there. And it begins with the Archangel Gabriel saying to the Prophet Muhammad, "In the name of Allah," the Arabic word for God, "the creator and sustainer of the worlds, most gracious, most merciful, master of the day of judgment, thee do we worship, and thine aid we seek. Show us the straight way, the way of whom thou hast bestowed thy grace, thy whose portion is not wrath, and who not goeth astray." Okay? And that's known as the Fatima. That's the opening verse of the Quran. Well, anyway, they revealed, the Archangel Gabriel was said to reveal to him these 5 rules called the pillars, which are known as follows: charity, which you should give to poor people; fasting, which they have called Ramadan, which is the month in which they fast. Let's see, they do the 5 prayers a day, and they do the pilgrimage to Mecca, which we'll get into a little bit later, and their confessions of faith, which the confession of faith goes, "La ilaha illallah Muhammadan Rasulallah," which is, there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger. Okay? So anyway, he develops a following in Arabia, but the local leaders see him as a threat to their order, as paganism was a pretty big game for the city. So in 622, he and his followers and his family fled to Medina, which the Muslims date as the beginning of their faith. So he fought against Mecca from Medina, and then marched on Mecca with 10,000 followers in 630 AD. He pardoned the former enemies, but destroyed the idols they once worshipped, and Mecca became the center of Islam before he died in 632 AD. Okay? So when he dies, it would seem for a moment that things might die out, but his dedicated followers continued the religion, and they spread the word of Islam largely through the sword in what is known as holy war, called jihad. And you had this people called the Caliphate, who were these people who were the followers of Prophet Muhammad, that were there to continue the religion as well as lead things afterwards. And they had what was known as Sharia, which is their religious law that they have through which they enforce through the teachings of the Holy Quran. Okay? Now, some interesting things happen as a result of this. Islam largely displaces the ancient religions of the old world through this issue of jihad. And they make some really interesting advances, however, as time goes on. Now, the religious warfare gets kind of bloody at times. But what's the interesting thing about Islam is this, is that you see, with the Quran, and before you ask, I'm a Methodist, okay? I just read a whole lot of things before you even go there and ask those kinds of questions. I'm just going to put that out there right now, okay? I am a Methodist and remains pretty much Christian, okay? But I do believe in reading a lot of things for education. Just thought I'd put that out there, all right? Now, getting back to our story. One of the things about the Islam and the Quran was that they have a requirement that you are able to recite the Quran and read the Quran. And that's very important because you see, the stress on reading led to a rebirth of knowledge throughout the area of the Far East at this time, as well as much of the Byzantine Empire, you see. Because at this point, you still have the Dark Ages going on in Western Europe, where after Rome fell to the barbarians, knowledge and science and all of that is pretty much done with for the next millennium or so, until the days of the Renaissance and the invention of the printing press and the travels of Marco Polo, the things that you get in part 2 of this class, if you choose to take it. But anyway, Islam advances to the point that the Muslims start saving works that would otherwise rot in what is left of libraries. The caliphs start building great libraries. For example, in mathematics, they begin to invent the concept of zero and the concept of negative integers and such. For those of you who understand math, you know about negative integers. And they also create the numeric system that we have today. Now, prior to that, you had Roman numerals in the educated world, but these folks start the design of 1, 2, 3, 4, and so forth as we know it today, which makes it easier to have multiplication and division, as well as the higher forms of mathematics. So in about 859 AD, you have the rise of Al-Azhar University in Cairo, one of the oldest degree-granting universities that still exists to this day, as a matter of fact. And you also, during this time period, have you have about 3 million books in the Library of Tripoli during this time. You have a guy named Ibn Rashid, who was born in 1126 and dies in 1198, who translates the works of Aristotle. And so then in about 805 AD, in Baghdad, there was a general hospital built by a man named Harun al-Rashid. And so these hospitals were required licensed physicians, as well as care and so forth was free, based on the principle of Islamic charity. And there was one such hospital called the Qalaran Hospital in Cairo that was built in 12 AD and still exists today. Now, Islam spread to West Africa through a tribe called the Almoravids in 1076 AD, and in Janneh, in Mali, West Africa, they have the Grand Mosque that still exists today, one of the oldest buildings surviving in West Africa. So they also even had, and so Islam even went so far as to spread to Spain by the early 1000s AD. And there's a Grand Mosque in Cordoba, Spain, built in 785, that still exists. However, as time went on, you had the Crusades and other such things that almost put a halt to a lot of these advances. But one thing that we can say about the Muslim world is that it helped to reignite civilization in the Far East, as far as, when you had what was going on with the fall of ancient Rome and all of that. During the time of the Dark Ages of Western Europe, in the Eastern world, it is this kind of thing, that reliance on literacy and knowledge, that kept knowledge alive. And one other thing I'd like to talk about briefly is that it also gave birth to one of the great works of ancient literature, which was the Arabian Nights, which was where a lady named Shahrazad dealt with this crazy king who wanted to kill all of his wives, and she would recite him stories every night that kept his interest, and that saved her life. So these are the stories such as Aladdin and Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves and all that. Great work of literature if you ever get a chance to come across it. And of course, Disney made a couple of movies off this type of thing, but reading it is pretty fun. So with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, that's a little introduction to Islam. I'll provide you with some links as well as the pages where you can get this information. And I hope that you do well on your final exams. And it's been a great semester, and I hope to see some of you when we get back, should I say, in the fall. This is Professor Damon Fordham.